thrust into a very difficult situation. My mother was a school teacher. These were hard times. My father was a poet, so we hadn't had much when he was there. And the result was that he was erased. I only saw him a dozen times, maybe, in the rest of his life. They were always, the occasions are recounted in here because they were of some importance to me. But I thought that I didn't have any feelings at all. There's no anger in it. I don't feel angry at him. I discovered that I really didn't know what I felt. And when I read in the Times that he had died, I say in the book, I read with surprise that an acquaintance of mine had died in Los Angeles. Isn't that a terrible thing to say? And I admit at that point
that
it's
a terrible thing
to feel.
To feel.
Yeah. And, well, it's hard to say.
Yeah.
And I say in the book that it's not his fault, it's mine. But the rest of my life, I discovered, lo and behold, all these heroes of my life who pop up in this from every aspect of my life were people toward whom I was feeling something familial but didn't know it.
How soon after he died did you find out?
That he had died?
Mm-hmm.
I read it in the Times. A few days, said Lawrence.
You read it in the Times. There was nobody to call you and say your dad died?
No. But
what did you do when you read it, other than...
I looked for an emotion. I said, well, Jim, time to feel something, isn't it? I felt nothing. Maybe I'm just as stolid and as stony as Will Ferrell portrays me. Maybe that's it. Maybe Will's got me right, and that's the way I am. But in this book, there is a search. This book was a voyage of discovery, and for me, terribly exciting and sometimes moving and sometimes scary. Those parts of it, which are interwoven, as you know, it's not linear. It's interwoven with Inside the Actors Studio. It doubles back. It's concentric circles. It's like a Venn diagram. But this was probably the major discovery of the book, was that I have been on a search of which I was unaware.
It doesn't sound like you were obsessed or passionate to know a lot about him.
About my relationship with my father?
Yeah, and your father. I mean, you let it pass.
Yes, not only did I let it pass, but I set out in an opposite direction. As you recall from the book, you're a lawyer. That was my pursuit when I went to university.
You start this with the narrator's description of the clerk in the general prologue of Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales.
And gladly would he learn and gladly teach. Because the book begins with the creation of the Actors Studio Drama School, and thereby hangs a tale. I explained in the book, in the first chapter, perhaps unwisely, my passion for philosophy and for universal causation, determinism, for the argument that for every event there is a determinable cause, and that life occurs in links, and if any link is cut, the chain is broken. And I explain in the beginning of the book, in the first chapter of the book, the links that led to the school and to Inside the Actors Studio. And full disclosure, you're one of those links, of course. What happened was that I was now a member of the studio. Norris Church and Norman Mailer had persuaded me to join the studio, which I did very enthusiastically.
This was year what?
This was 15 years ago. And the studio was on its uppers. I mean, all the cultural institutions in New York were starving to death. The studio was going from hand to mouth. The studio's never been a school. It's never had tuition, never had graduation. It's never had fees of any kind. It's free.
What was it?
It's a private club. It is a place, a gymnasium, where the greatest actors who lived in New York between 1947 and the present time could audition and join. Famously hard to get into. Let's see, Dustin Hoffman auditioned 6 times. Jack Nicholson 5. Harvey Keitel 11. But once in, you were a life member. And it was a place to get out of the spotlight, away from the critics, away from the public, and to make mistakes, and to dare, and to learn the Stanislavski method.
And what was the impact of Strasberg on it?
Strasberg was profoundly impactful. Strasberg came in a couple of years after it was founded, and he was its guiding light until his death. He produced 2 generations of amazing actors. Think of it. From The early ones, Paul Newman and Steve McQueen and Jimmy Dean and Marilyn Monroe, right up through Pacino and De Niro and Jack Nicholson and Duvall and Dustin Hoffman. Generations of amazing actors. So he had a tremendous impact on it. The studio is a very important force in America. I say in the book that while the Comédie Française and the National Theatre of Great Britain and MGM in 1939, all of them had great rosters, and they made huge contributions. But no institution has ever had as deep a bench, as enormous a marquee as the Actors Studio. And back then in 1993, we were faced with some very, very serious problems that could have put an end to the Actors Studio. And it was after one of these meetings that I went to bed, and I woke up the next morning, and there was something in my head that was complete.
The entire plan.
The entire plan. Freud insisted that the unconscious can work at night. For some reason, mine did. I woke up the next morning, and there it was, a school. I even knew what classes would be like. And I said to my wife, Kedekai, do you think that Jonathan Fanton would take my call? She was a board member of the Parsons School of Design, of which she was an alumna, and we'd been at dinners there. Anyway, he took my call. And I said to him, what if at the stroke of a pen one could restore to the new school some of the glory that adhered to it when it rescued 200 scholars and artists from Germany?
Right.
And Piscator created the dramatic workshop in the 40s and then went back to Germany. Go on, taciturn Yankee. And I said, what if I could persuade my colleagues at the Actors Studio to create for the first time in our history a degree-granting program? He said, where's the pen and when do I sign?
When do I sign?
And I then went back to the studio and said, look, we can rescue ourselves. We can become an independent institution financially. Let's create a school. Let's open the doors, not to let the world in. It's still a private, crotchety, ornery place. Fine. Difficult to get into, impossible to get into for some. But we'll let the method out in a degree-granting program. So anyway, a committee was formed. I headed it for the studio. It was my idea. And the new school appointed a committee. Fanton oversaw this whole thing. And we created the school. And it took a year to do that. And then in August, we were accredited by the state. And lo and behold, we had to admit students. Look out, here comes Charlie. We had to admit students. And where do we begin now? At that point, you invited us to this table.
This very table?
This table. And it was Norman Mailer, remember, and Ellen Burstyn. I was there. Paul Newman was there. And you asked us about the school, and you let us talk about it until we were blue in the face. Subsequently, the registrations flooded in.
And you would ask people, how did you know
about
it? How did you know about
it? Every school does that. How did you know about our school? And they all said, the Charlie Rose Show. And I say, if that link, if you had not invited us, that link would not have existed. And there's every chance in the world that you and I would not be sitting here talking today.
Yeah, see, I don't agree with that. Because for this reason, I would like to, and I'd like to give you to give me all the credit that you can possibly give me. I will take it all.
I'm going to prove it to you in a minute. You want to prove?
Yes.